Europe spent more than a century teaching the world how to build the automobile.
It never imagined one of its greatest challengers would come from a battery company. History rarely announces the beginning of a revolution. Most of the time, it looks ordinary, a laboratory, a factory, a company almost nobody is paying attention to. While the world watches today's leaders, tomorrow is usually being built somewhere else. For more than 100 years, tomorrow belonged to Europe. From the first automobile to the world's most admired luxury brands, Europe didn't simply participate in the automotive industry. It defined it. Mercedes-Benz made engineering a symbol of prestige. BMW turned precision into identity. Porsche proved that performance could become emotion. Across Germany, Italy, and France, generations of engineers pursued a single ambition: to build a better car than the one before it. And year after year, they succeeded. Factories expanded. Supply chains stretched across the continent. Millions of people built their lives around one industry. The automobile became more than transportation. It became one of Europe's greatest industrial achievements. For over a century, that achievement seemed untouchable. Every new challenger followed the same path: build a faster engine, a better transmission, a more luxurious interior. Compete with Europe on Europe's terms. Some came close. None changed the rules, because the rules themselves never changed. Until they did, not with the sound of an engine, but with silence. The future didn't arrive with more cylinders. It arrived with electricity, almost unnoticed at first. A better battery here, a new charging station there, stricter emissions regulations, falling battery costs. None of these moments seemed historic on their own. But history is rarely changed by one dramatic event. It changes when hundreds of small changes begin moving in the same direction. Slowly, the question inside the automotive industry stopped being, who builds the best engine? It became, who understands energy best? That single question quietly reshaped an industry that had spent more than a century chasing mechanical perfection. And while Europe's greatest manufacturers were still adapting to that new reality, someone else had been preparing for it all along. Not inside Munich, not inside Stuttgart, not inside Maranello, but inside Shenzhen. The company had no Formula One victories, no century-old heritage, no legendary badge. Most people outside China had never heard its name. It wasn't trying to become the next Mercedes-Benz. It wasn't trying to become the next BMW. It wasn't even trying to build the world's best car. It was trying to master the technology that the next generation of cars would depend on. Its name was BYD. Most people believed BYD was entering Europe's industry. History may remember it differently. History may remember that Europe entered BYD's future. Europe believed the next battle would look like every battle before it. A better engine, a stronger brand, a more beautiful car. For more than a century, that had been enough. BYD never prepared for that war, because BYD never believed the future would be decided by the same rules that had shaped the past. It believed the next automotive revolution would begin long before a car ever reached the road. It would begin inside the battery. That was the difference. And that difference changed everything. Blank, underscore, blank. For over 100 years, the engine had been the heart of every automobile. It determined performance. Character. Identity. Entire companies built their reputations around making that heart more powerful, more refined, and more reliable. Then the heart moved. Not beneath the hood. Beneath the floor. The battery was no longer just another component. It became the foundation upon which everything else depended. The architecture, the software, the manufacturing process, even the economics of the entire industry. The center of gravity had shifted, and industries rarely survive unchanged when their center of gravity moves. Blank, underscore, blank. Most manufacturers responded by asking, "How do we build an electric version of the cars we already know?" BYD asked a different question. If the battery becomes the most important technology, why would we build the company the old way? That single question separated BYD from almost everyone else. It wasn't redesigning a vehicle. It was redesigning the organization behind it. Blank, underscore, blank. While many automakers depended on long chains of suppliers to deliver the technologies of the electric age, BYD invested in mastering those technologies itself, not because it wanted control for its own sake, but because every technology it understood became knowledge it could improve. Every improvement became experience. Every experience became speed. And in a technological revolution, speed compounds. A company that learns slightly faster today often becomes dramatically stronger tomorrow. That was the advantage Europe struggled to see. Blank, underscore, blank. Imagine two teams trying to climb the same mountain. One carries the best equipment ever built for yesterday's route. The other studies the new terrain before taking its first step. The first team is stronger. The second reaches the summit first. That was the real competition. Not Europe versus China. Not combustion versus electricity. But preparation versus adaptation. Blank, underscore, blank. By the early 2020s, the results could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. BYD wasn't simply producing electric vehicles at scale. It was improving them at a pace that reflected the way the company itself had been designed. Many observers looked at BYD and saw another automaker. History may remember something else. A technology company that happened to build cars. The distinction is small. Its consequences were enormous. Because technology companies compete differently. They shorten development cycles. They integrate hardware and software. They treat every product not as a finished masterpiece, but as the starting point for the next improvement. That philosophy transformed smartphones. It transformed consumer electronics. Now it was beginning to transform automobiles. Blank, underscore, blank. Europe believed it was competing against a new manufacturer. In reality, it was competing against a new industrial model. One perfected over a century of mechanical excellence. The other built for an age where software, batteries, and learning speed would define leadership. Neither model was created by accident. Both were brilliant. But history has a habit of rewarding the model that belongs to the next era, not the last one. And that was the moment the automotive industry stopped asking, "Can BYD build a great car?" It began asking something far more unsettling. What if the future no longer belongs to companies built for the past? The moment BYD arrived in Europe, the conversation changed. It was no longer about one company. It was about one question. What does leadership look like when an industry rewrites its own rules? For more than a century, Europe's automotive dominance had been built on mechanical excellence. Its greatest companies mastered the engine, perfected manufacturing, built brands that generations trusted without hesitation. Those strengths had created one of history's greatest industrial empires. They had not disappeared. But the industry around them had. Electric vehicles did not simply introduce a new powertrain. They introduced a new center of gravity. The companies that would define the next century would not necessarily be those with the richest heritage. They would be those that learned, adapted, and improved the fastest. That realization reached far beyond BYD. Across Europe, automakers accelerated battery investments. Software divisions grew from supporting teams into strategic priorities. Factories designed for one era began transforming for another. The race was no longer measured only in horsepower. It was measured in development cycles, in software updates, in battery chemistry, in manufacturing flexibility. The competition had moved from the showroom to the laboratory. And perhaps that was BYD's greatest impact. Not that it forced Europe to fear a new competitor, but that it forced Europe to question assumptions that had remained unchanged for generations. History has seen this pattern before. Steam replaced muscle. Electricity replaced steam. Computers replaced paper. The Internet replaced distance. None of those revolutions succeeded because the previous generation suddenly became incompetent. They succeeded because a different capability became more valuable than the one before it. The same is happening to the automobile. The question is no longer, who builds the best car? The question is, who builds the company that can build the best car 5 years from now? That is a profoundly different challenge, and it is one every automaker now faces. Not just in Europe, but everywhere. Perhaps that is why the story of BYD matters. Not because it proves one country has replaced another. Not because one company has defeated another. But because it reminds us that every industrial empire eventually reaches the same moment. The moment when experience is no longer enough. When yesterday's strengths must evolve to survive tomorrow's world. Europe's story is not over. Far from it. Some of the world's greatest engineers still work there. Some of the world's most admired automotive brands are still there. The next chapter has not yet been written. But one thing has already become clear. The future will not be won by the companies that defend tradition the longest. It will be won by those willing to reinvent themselves before they are forced to. Because history rarely belongs to the companies that build the perfect machine. It belongs to the companies that recognize when the machine itself is about to change.